All right, world history class. Let's get to it. I'm not sure if you can see me on your screen. I don't think you can, but that's all right. Just take my word for it when I tell you that the quarantine mustache is coming in very nicely. So hopefully I can get that figured out and I'll be back up all in your face tomorrow. So, um, we've been talking about the American War for Independence, right? We're in the Age of Revolutions unit. So here's what we're going to look at: what was going on in the early years of the war? How did the British Navy play a role in the Battle of Brandywine Creek? And we're looking at this map right here. And how did the Battle of Vincennes reflect the shifting fortunes of Americans? Well, the early years of the war, the British were dominating. In terms of number two, how did the British Navy play a role in the Battle of Brandywine Creek? If you look at the map, excuse me, it shows that British troops sailed south from the area of New York City, then north through Chesapeake Bay to reach the site of the battle. So the British Navy was playing a large role here in the first years of the war. The United States Navy, remember at this point, really didn't match Britain's, didn't even begin to. And that's why the U.S. was so intent on getting France's help. Remember, this whole time, Benjamin Franklin, who is considered one of our most iconic and impactful founding fathers, he spent most of the war in France. He was a French diplomat, a diplomat to France, excuse me, an ambassador of sorts. Franklin was a weird guy. He had a real fascination with France. He's a very well known nudist, and French culture really appealed to him. But more than his own personal tastes, he recognized, as did the other founding fathers, how significant it would be to have France's support. So, and that all goes back again to this lack of a strong navy on the part of the United States, of the Patriots. And then, how did the Battle of Vincennes reflect the shifting fortunes of the Americans? Well, the South and the West became key battlegrounds in the latter part of the war. So, after losing at Vincennes in 1788, the Americans were victorious the next year, and that helped them secure the Ohio River Valley around here. So, once they got the Ohio River Valley, they had really claimed all of the West. So the Battle of Vincennes in 1778 was tremendously impactful. War. All right, so here's our timeline. And remember, we talked last week about how Boston was really the main hub. Boston, Philadelphia, but mainly Boston was really the main hub for Patriot activity. But the war is expanding. So in New York, the British strategy, they had previously retreated from Boston in March of 1776, and they moved their attacks to the middle states. That was part of their plan to stop the rebellion by isolating the New England states. They wanted to cut off New England from the rest of the states. Their new target was the colony's most prosperous and busiest seaport, which was New York City. The British also fought with the Hessians. The Hessians were German mercenaries. Mercenaries, as it says there, just a soldier who fights for money. So these two brothers in New York, General William Howe and Admiral Richard Howe, They join forces on Staten Island and they sail into New York Harbor in the summer of 1776. This is the largest British expeditionary force ever assembled. They had 32,000 soldiers. And again, thousands of those were German mercenaries. So Washington is going to rally 23,000 troops of his own, also a huge unit, a huge group of troops for the Patriot Army, but still, he's 9,000 less than the Brits under the leadership of the Howe brothers. Most of his troops, on top of that, were untrained, where the Brits, they were fighting with professional British soldiers and then very well-trained, ruthless mercenaries. Most of Washington's guys were just regular dudes who had taken up arms for the cause. So the battle for New York is going to end in late August, and the Americans retreat after taking very heavy losses. By late fall, the British had pushed Washington's army across the Delaware River into Pennsylvania. And the vast majority of Washington's men had either deserted or had been killed or captured. So at this point, fewer than 8,000 men remain under Washington's command. What's worse for Washington was that the terms of their enlistment were going to end December 31st. In other words, remember, we had a draft and a draft of sorts. And these guys signed enlistment papers. And just in the matter of a few months, basically their contract, their requirements to be in the Army were going to end. So he desperately did Washington, a big victory of some kind to keep them from going home. Along comes the Battle of Trenton. So Washington doesn't look good. By the end of 1776, Washington had lost already a quarter of his army, captured or dead. Thomas Paine, if you remember, the author of Common Sense, wrote, and this is a very, very well-known historical quote. It comes up in popular culture from time to time. Paine wrote, "These are the times that try men's souls." And there's a lot of talk that Washington should be removed from his command. It's the beginning of winter. This is a time where everyone lays down their weapons and camps in for the winter. They get rested, they train and replenish their supplies and wait on spring. And in the spring, they would resume fighting. So the springtime basically was Washington's one big chance. It was his last chance. Let's see if this will work. No, I don't think it's going to. Let's try that another way. Hope you guys are all staying safe, staying out of trouble. You know what, guys? We're not going to worry about that. Let's get back to it. So yeah, Washington hadn't won a battle. He's taking very heavy losses. Morale is low, and Washington, he decides to risk everything on one large attack over Christmas night, 1776. And this is the subject being depicted in the amazing, that really cool, I think, painting, Washington crossing the Delaware. But so it was a fierce storm. He leads about 2,400 men in little rowboats across the Delaware River, the icy Delaware River. And by 8 o'clock the next morning, they have marched 9 miles through the sleet and the snow to Trenton, New Jersey. In Trenton, Trenton was held by a unit of Hessians. Because of the storm and the holiday, most of the Hessians had drunk too much rum the night before and were still sleeping it off. So the Hessians, basically had a snow party and got drunk, and they were still sleeping and hungover the next morning. In a surprise attack, the Americans come in, they kill 30 of them, they take 918 captive, and also very important, they confiscate 6 Hessian cannons. Any weaponry we could get at this point was very much appreciated. Now we get back to the Battle of Saratoga. This is about 8 days later. So we have another victory 8 days later against 1,200 British people stationed excuse me, that's not in Saratoga, that's in Princeton. So they win in crossing the Delaware, excuse me. They win in Princeton, and things are looking good. Patriot morale is high. The Battle of Saratoga, why is that so important? It's because it is the battle that makes France finally decide that they're going to join on our side. Remember, we've been courting them, but France was very hesitant to get involved in another war because wars cost money. And they had just lost their own war, and they didn't want to spend money they didn't basically want to bet on the wrong team. So Saratoga, John Burgoyne, Burgoyne, he sets out with 4,000 redcoats, 3,000 Hessians, and 1,000 Mohawk Indians to surround New England and isolate it from the rest of the colonies. Made it all the way through a PowerPoint. So anyway, the Continental Congress. So Burgoyne is in control of the redcoats, and this will be, of course, posted on YouTube, so you'll have access to all this. But I don't know where my Saratoga slides went. But Horatio Gates, he was the commander of the Continental Congress, excuse me, and he's going to be the one that commands the Northern Department of the Continental Army. So Gates gathered militiamen and soldiers from all over New York and New England. Burgoyne lost several hundred men every time his forces clashed with the Americans. Americans troops, they finally surrounded Burgoyne at Saratoga, and Burgoyne surrenders. He surrenders his army to General Gates October 17th, 1777. And when he does that, the Americans capture over 8,000 British troops. So a huge, huge victory. So let's talk winning the war, right? We're already right on the doorstep of victory. So the Southern strategy. Actually, let's go back. Let's talk more about Valley Forge because I didn't give full credit to this man, Friedrich von Steuben and Marquis de Lafayette, two foreigners who had a major impact helping our troops get ready to go. Sorry to jump around chronologically, but remember we talked about how the Patriot Army was mainly militia members. Well, these guys, von Steuben and Marquis de Lafayette, both foreign generals or their equivalent of generals. And von Steuben is really going to be credited with helping to sharpen up our militia to turn them into a professional army. And Marquis de Lafayette did the same. He actually led units into battle. So that's pretty remarkable. A Frenchman leading American troops, Patriot troops, into battle. Now let's keep going. So we know that the Northern strategy was to cut off New England and to isolate them from the rest of the colonies. The Southern strategy of the Brits was they basically changed their mind after Saratoga because they took that big loss, so they changed their strategy. So in the summer of 1778, they're going to start to shift their efforts towards the south. Basically, their strategy is to rally loyalist support. They wanted to reclaim their former colonies and then sort of slowly fight their way back north. Why do you think they would expect more loyalists in the South? Well, because as we've talked all along, the Patriot extremists, right, the most outspoken Pats were up north, and the South there was less industry. So these taxes and such that were being placed on the colonies had a little bit less of an impact on Southerners. There didn't turn out to be quite the presence of loyalists in the South that the Brits had hoped for, though. Still, they have early success in the South. Like our lovely city, Savannah, is going to be taken at the end of 1778. By the spring of 79, the Brits had taken all of Georgia. 1780, British commanders, a guy named General Henry Clinton, and then General Charles Cornwallis, who we've all heard of, they sail south with about 8,500 men. And they're going to take Charleston. At the time, it was called Charlestown, two separate words. They take Charleston, South Carolina. This is a big one for a number of reasons. One of them being that they capture almost 6,000 American soldiers. So Clinton feels like they pretty much have this part of the country locked up, and he leaves back for New York. He leaves Cornwallis to conquer the rest of the South, which they thought would be fairly easy. So for most of 1780, Cornwallis is actually succeeding. His military is joined by thousands of African Americans who had escaped Patriot slave owners. A lot of former slaves, a lot of slaves fled because the British put out word, they put out a mass notice that any slave who ran away from its Patriot master and joined the British Army would immediately be granted their freedom. You can understand, one can understand how that would be a major motivator. So thousands, it was successful. Thousands come to join Cornwallis. In August, Cornwallis's army, by August, it's taken pretty much all of South Carolina. Then he tries to go into North Carolina. And when he goes to North Carolina, these Patriot bands of militiamen are going to attack him, and they're able to cut off British communication lines. Remember, communication technology is it just cannot be overstated what a massive role it's had in every element of life. I'm currently, if you're watching this, and kudos to you if you're watching it, but I'm communicating with you by sharing a screen via video link. Well, back then, if you could cut off the actual roads that they traveled manually with written messages on, that was a colossal advantage. So Cornwallis, he tries to go to North Carolina. He stopped. He retreats back to South Carolina. Along comes Yorktown. Well, first of all, so 1781, Washington orders a guy named Nathaniel Greene. Nathaniel Greene is considered his best general. He marches him south to harass Cornwallis. So before we get into Yorktown, so as Cornwallis is retreating to South Carolina, Nathaniel Greene, the general, and his troops are continuing to sort of pepper Cornwallis with attacks. Greene mastered what we call guerrilla warfare, which you guys have probably heard of. It's instead of a lineup, ready, aim, fire, it's you're hiding behind an embankment of some kind. You pop out, you shoot, you retreat. It was very effective for the Patriots, for the United States, because we didn't have the numbers. We didn't have the same number of soldiers, so we had to get crafty with it. So Cornwallis decides he's tired of getting harassed by Greene in South Carolina. He's going to move the fight to Virginia. And when he gets to Virginia, he meets up with reinforcements. First, he tries to capture, sorry guys, the divisions led by Lafayette and von Steuben. That doesn't work. So he turns his army, Cornwallis does. By this point, his army is about 7,500 soldiers. He turns it to the peninsula between the James and the York rivers, and he camps at Yorktown. He wants to fortify Yorktown, take Virginia, and then move forward, move north to join Clinton's forces towards New York. Maybe this will work. No luck, huh? Well, anyway, it was the last battle of the war, and like I said, like I think I said, it was huge because it finally showed France that we were the likely winner, and they joined forces with us. So now it comes time to negotiate a peace treaty. We've got about 4 minutes left on the lecture today. So I think I might stop since we've officially won the war, or I guess not officially, but once we sign this treaty, we will have won the war. The battling is over. Really good job so far. Guys, last week, this class had more people coming to the Zoom sessions than any other class. I encourage you to keep doing that. And if at all possible, or if you have anything that you're curious about, that you want to know, that you'd like some more insight about, then tune in Monday through Thursday at 10 a.m. You're going to have some classwork called Week 2, Day 1 Summary Questions. So look for that on the classwork tab. As always, I hope you guys are staying safe and staying out of trouble. I will talk to you all tomorrow.